joined by David Rauch, who is the founder and CEO of ProTech Building Services. Good evening, David.
Good evening, Jim.
First of all, what is ProTech Building Services? What do you do?
Well, we maintain and service about 1,000 communities in Southern California and Nevada, Las Vegas. And we also work with developers throughout the U.S. in writing their HOA maintenance manuals, which they give to their board of directors at new communities.
I guess I'm not sure what kind of service that is and what an HOA is. I think for most lay people, these are terms with which we're not familiar.
Sure. It's a homeowners association, condo communities pretty much, mid-rise, high-rise, horizontal communities. Yep.
Okay, very good. All right, now then, from that perspective, I gather you are among those who see a really big housing crisis developing out there. Would that be correct?
That's certainly correct, yes.
All right, what's the nature of that crisis?
Well, I mean, housing has gotten much more expensive. Rents have gotten much more expensive. As you know, evictions are up. And there's a lot of things driving all these increases, not the least of which is inflation, but it's really demand that's driving a lot of this. And the apartment building and home building industries are, hit. Obviously, you've heard about lumber and other materials going up in cost. Labor is really difficult, even if you can find it. Land costs are rising. So home sales, home costs are just through the roof, and rents are too.
Mm-hmm. Are we talking about a crisis principally for those who buy or for those who rent?
Well, I think it's for both. It's, for buyers, the average cost of a home now is $403,000. And interest rates have gone from, the 30-year has gone from about 2.5, 3 to now 5. And so that's very difficult. Rents are going up quite a bit. Of course, some states are really bad, like California, Hawaii, New Jersey, New York are states with very, very high rents. So they're both difficult.
Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, somebody is paying these figures, or we wouldn't have anybody charging them that high. Who's paying for all of this? Well,
that's same people that have always been paying for it. Of course, here in California, there's a lot of Californians that are selling their houses and moving to other states. There was somewhat of a mass migration out of the state in the last couple of years, and those Californians, to the chagrin of a lot of people in other states, are driving up, not just home prices, but rents too. So, that's a serious problem. And California is unique in that its housing situation, and I'm sure you've heard of this, is dire. California has tent cities lining the freeways. And it's got the highest poverty rate in the nation of any state. And it's primarily because of regulation. And that regulation, the amount of regulations from the state government affect not just, the home builders, the homes for sale, but also, homes for rent. Because it's extremely difficult for builders of both homes and rentals to build. Getting a permit in California, takes 2.5 years, 900 and some days to just get a permit. And there's some amazing regulations that you wouldn't believe in California.
Why don't you amaze us with a few of those? What exactly is the state regulating that is creating all of these problems? And I have to wonder why this hasn't become obvious to the state.
Yeah, well, it's somewhat complex, so it's hard for a lot of normal people just reading the paper to understand. But and California is emblematic of about 15 other states throughout the country that have these same regulations. But California is the worst. And in California, you have this thing called CEQA. It's the California Environmental Quality
I'm sorry.
Act.
What is that word you just used?
It's an acronym. CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act.
Oh, okay.
And that was passed some time ago. So if you're a builder of homes or apartments in California, you have to make a CEQA application, and that's, you got to check all these boxes, and it adds, again, a tremendous amount of length of time to get your permits. But more importantly, any neighbor that doesn't like the project can bring a lawsuit, which is what happens a lot, to stop that project. It's also called NIMBYism, not in my backyard.
Right.
But CEQA is the vehicle that is used here in California to shut down development, because there's plenty of money in California, huge demand for housing and apartments, but things just can't get built because of that's the primary regulation. There's other regulations too. There's a new one that new California Air Resources Board, another acronym called CARB. That board is now regulating climate change, things. So it's, again, another tool that environmentalists can use to shut down a project if it doesn't meet certain environmental standards. And here's the real twist. Unions, large unions have gotten together, and they can actually hold a lot of these bigger projects hostage for what they call project labor agreements. And that's basically, saying you can't build this project. We're going to sue you through CEQA unless you agree to hire the union to build the project.
That sounds like extortion.
Well, it is. It's, and again, it's complex, but that's the essence of it. There's one other regulation here in California that's really horrible. And if you're a builder, you're well aware of this one, and it's got a weird name, but it's called inclusionary zoning, which is really a fancy word for, the government will not allow you to build a community, a project, either for rent or for sale, unless you set aside 10% of the units for low-income people, which basically means you're building those units for free. So that's another regulation that adds to the cost of both housing for sale and rentals.
And it hasn't occurred to anyone in California state government that maybe they are the problem?
No. I don't think they think there's a problem at all.
Yeah, that was a rhetorical question. Yeah. How widespread is this? We focus on California, which is usually a pretty good target, but how many other states are aiming in the same direction, if you will?
Well, there's unfortunately there's 14 other states now that have CEQA type laws and regulations. And, this is a boon for attorneys because all these things require, lawsuits. It's just lawsuit after lawsuit. So attorneys are doing quite well here in California and these other states. But if you look now, so you take a house in California that, say, costs, $500,000 to build or sell. So you're buying a $500,000 house in California. The same house in a less regulated environment like Texas, Oklahoma, Arizona, Florida, that house, would cost $250,000 to build, to sell. That's the amount of cost that regulation brings to the sale of these homes and rentals. It's huge.
Tell us about the problem of evictions.
Evictions are certainly a problem. I think the main thing to remember is that from 2000 to 2018, in that time period, there were 70 million evictions, which is a lot, almost 4 million evictions a year. So in 2020 and 2021, when the pandemic began, there were, as you know, moratoriums, federal and state moratoriums placed on evictions, so landlords couldn't evict people. But, once those moratoriums were lifted last year, there was this tremendous demand, tremendous pressure to, stabilize the system. So that's why you're seeing more than the normal amount of evictions right now because of that pent-up demand.
Here is Leah in Petaluma, California. Good evening and welcome to the Jim Bohannon Show with David Rauch. What's your question or comment, Leah?
Yeah, I just have a comment. So I live in California, and I've been living in California for over 60 years. I lived 40 years in Southern California, and I now live in Northern California. And what the gentleman on your show isn't mentioning, the real problem with building in California and why they are not allowing it is because we don't have the water. There is a lack of water. And without water, you can't build. And I don't mean the production of it. I mean, you have to have enough water for the homes, and we don't. And that's because, whether you believe it or not, climate change. That's the big problem. We don't have water, and that is why there's what you're calling regulations. You can blame it on the politicians and on the liberals, but it's about water, and you can't deny that.
All right, let's let our guest comment.
Well, water is certainly a big part of the infrastructure in San Diego, of course, which is a high desert. It's basically a desert here in Southern California. San Diego, unlike the rest of California, doesn't have as bad a water problem because it gets 10% of its water from a desalinization plant that was built a few years ago. But nonetheless, you're correct. There's a huge water problem with the Colorado River. Lake Mead is down, Lake Powell is way down, and you might have read recently that they're going to cut the allocation of water from the Colorado River to Arizona here next year by, I think, 500,000 acre feet, or a lot of water. So, yeah, water is a big problem.
Why don't they build more desalinization plants? Obviously, with this kind of pent-up demand, what might at one time have been economically unviable is certainly viable now.
Well, you can build more desalinization plants. The other thing that's been done here in Orange County first and then now in San Diego County, they call it toilet to tap. So they're basically taking the sewage water and shower water and dishwater and everything. They're treating it, triple filtration treatment and reusing that water too, and that saves a lot of water. And then during I think the biggest problem with water supply, it's not a matter of not having enough water, because every year there's literally trillions of gallons of water that runs off every storm and goes into the ocean. So it's really a problem of building more dams and storage facilities. I think we just built a big one at Lake Oro, or a big storage facility here in California recently, which was good news. But to get the environmentalists to allow something that large to be built is not easy. Again, you got regulations on water storage too.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of people making six-figure jobs to get in the way of solutions. Now, for those who are evicted, do they go straight to the streets, or do they find lesser inadequate housing? I'm not quite sure how that generally works.
Well, unfortunately, I think a lot of them do go to the streets. They live in their cars, or try to find family or friends that will put them up. You'd be surprised at how many people in California are on the streets right now. I mean, if you drive along the highways, any highway near any big city, but specifically L.A., San Francisco are the worst. San Diego's a little better. but you'll see them lined up right along the freeways, the blue tents all over. And again, it's, in my estimation, it's over-regulation that's holding builders back from building more apartments and condominiums.
Where are success stories, then, with lesser regulation, without as many of the problems we've outlined here? What would be the anti-California, if you will, a state like Texas, for example?
Absolutely. Texas and Florida are two great examples where, builders are unfettered by a lot of regulation, and they're building plenty of housing and building plenty of apartments. But there is one other problem, too, that's raised its head in the last few years, and that is venture capital companies getting into the home buying and apartment buying business. So, in other words, last year, 24% of all homes that were purchased, new homes that were purchased by venture capital firms. And, there's Blackstone spun off a company called Invitation Homes. There's other companies, but basically what's going on is there's two reasons they're so prolific right now, and one reason is because knowing that inflation is coming, they're looking for safe harbor for their cash, and these VC firms have billions and billions of dollars, so they're looking to, put those dollars into assets. The second reason is because they're able to buy money. They can buy money and a mortgage at 1.5% interest, whereas you and me and the regular person, you have to pay the prevailing 30-year fixed rate.
Why do they get a break?
Because they have so much money, and they have the ability to borrow at very, very, very low rates. So you'll see. You've heard of the many people lining up to buy a house all over the country the last few years, and some cash buyer came along, offered all cash, more than the offer price. In 1 out of 4 instances, that was a venture capital firm.
Here is John in Santa Barbara, California. Good evening.
Hi, and I apologize if I come off too crass, but, the housing, purchasing a house, this whole system is in shambles. I'm frustrated. The Congress sitting on their hands, the legislature sitting on their hands. When you get immersed, as I am, in this buying process, you see the terrible deceit, the dishonesty that's going on, and it's uncalled for, from the credit rating companies to the real estate developers to the bankers. It's all ripe with fraud. Now, he was mentioning the venture capitalists. I have a friend who was trying to buy a house in Oakland, and the people that are buying these homes now in California are the real estate developers. This developer came to my friend who makes $150,000, was trying to bid on a house. She had about $50,000 saved, and that developer came to her and said, "You will not win this bid," and he outbid her by $100,000. The average Joe doesn't have a chance in this industry. And, they blame COVID and all these other things. Everybody's making excuses, but nobody's cleaning this system up. And that's horrible. Any American that gets immersed in this buying process would come away frustrated as all get out. And there's no reason for it. The legislator is sitting on their hands and not doing anything about it. It's terrible.
All right. You see things as being that bad, David?
Actually, I do. I completely agree. It's what's going on in California, and this is the canary in the coal mine, if you will. What's going on here in California with overregulation and making it practically impossible to build new communities and homes and rentals is going to come to a state near you. 14 other states are already using environmental laws to stop projects. And it's just simple supply and demand. There's a lot of, 36, 38 million people in California, and a big portion of the housing stock, just disappears every year because of obsolescence. And you need to build new houses for people. And
you say obsolescence. You say obsolescence. I mean, what, are they not fashionable anymore? I mean,
No. Houses, just get old, and they just go bye-bye. And, they get to the point where it doesn't make economic sense to remodel a house anymore if it's that old. There's always I'd say about 5% of the housing stock that becomes obsolescent every year.
Let me bring up a phrase that undoubtedly you've heard many times, and as well as I have. I've always been kind of curious as to how true it is, but that phrase is, boy, they don't make them like they used to. I mean, we've all seen houses that were owned by our grandparents that could maybe use a coat of paint, but that was about it. In fact, are today's houses cheaply thrown together? Is that why this obsolescence occurs? And if so, why is there not a market for houses that are built with a certain amount of substance to them?
Well, that's a good subject, Jim. Actually, when I was growing up, when you were growing up, 50, 75 years ago, homes were built differently. Homes were usually built by a master builder who basically did all the trades. He did the electrical, the plumbing, he did the lasting and the drywall. He built the house. But starting in the 70s, home building became more of a production building. And today, the biggest home builders in the country, D.R. Horton, they build, probably 500,000 homes a year. I mean, these are production home builders, and they have all the subcontractors lined up, so they're built differently. I don't know if
why is there a market for that? I mean, goodness knows most of us, if we knew what we were buying, would said, "Thanks, you can take your El Cheapo, and I'll go elsewhere." Yeah. Oh, is this a matter of public disclosure? I mean, we wouldn't be buying the crap if we knew what it was.
Yeah, no. You're talking about custom homes, and every year there's a lot of custom homes built, but they're a lot more expensive because, again, production homes, built in communities, often with a homeowners association, an HOA, because almost all new communities are built in an HOA now. They're built on a production basis, and that's the least expensive way to build homes. But again, the whole point. The only way to bring down rents, bring down the cost of housing, is to build more of it. Everybody talks about an affordable housing crisis, but the simplest solution is just to build more houses. Now, again, California is the example of what could happen when you just regulate the industry to death. And so that's just a warning for the rest of the country, is that regulations, and they creep up, that you add one here, you add one there, and all of a sudden it costs $1 million to build a home, which is crazy.
It is indeed. More to come. 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. And here is Levon in Ventura, California. Good evening.
Oh, good evening, Jim. I'm so glad to hear your voice.
Thank you.
I'm concerned about the this water situation in San Diego that they have built to reuse brown, make better use of groundwater.
Okay.
Is it possible? People are not drinking the water, though, are they? Is it just for landscaping and purposes other than for drinking?
The repurposing of water, the so-called gray water, maybe you could explain that further, David.
Yeah, sure. Actually, that's not gray water. Gray water is the water that people use on their homes that does not go into the septic system or into the municipal sewer system. Gray water is from a house. But what we're talking about is called toilet to tap, and it's all the water that's used in the house is sent off. It's treated, I think, 4 or 5 different ways. Then what happens is it's pumped down into storage into the aquifer where it sits, and then when it's needed, it's just pumped out again. So, there was a lot of uproar in San Diego when it was first introduced. They've been doing it in San Diego, I think, they've been doing that. They've had a system in Orange County for 20 years now. But it got the name of toilet to tap, which is obviously derogatory. But the water seems to be fine. I haven't read any studies showing that it's to be unsafe or anything.
No one is short-circuiting any safety regulations.
Yeah, no, right. I don't think so. But but again, it's San Diego has figured out a way how to make use of seawater by desalinization. It gets 10% of its water there, and then this toilet to tap method, and of course we get a lot of water from the Colorado River.
Too many people are trying to get water from the Colorado River. The fact simply is there are too many people with straws in their mouths slurping at the Colorado River. It simply can't support that many people.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. It's a shame. Fortunately, this summer there's been a lot of monsoon storms, and it's done quite a bit to replenish the aquifers, but it hasn't really changed the level at Lake Powell or Lake Mead.
Here is Jeff in Logan, Utah. Good evening.
Good evening, sir. Thank you. It might or may not be true, but it's believed that a couple of the biggest churches in the country are housing an awful lot of the illegal aliens in the low-income housing that would have been nice for the rest of us normal Americans. I wonder if we could speak to that subject.
All right. That assumes, I guess, that a lot of these churches own a lot of houses. I wasn't aware of that, but David, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, it's surprisingly correct. You're right on. Churches are the largest landowner in the United States, owning 39,000 acres of undeveloped land.
All of that non-taxable? Is that?
That would make sense to me. I actually don't know, but I would think it would be. But they own not only a lot of land, but they own land that can be developed. And yes, you got to ask yourself. There's supposedly 2 million immigrants that have come into our country this past year, not including the getaways or gotaways, I think they're called, the ones we don't know about. So where are 2 million people gone? Where are they staying? And I think this gentleman has pointed out a very, very good question. I do believe he's right. A lot of them are staying in properties that are owned by churches. And of course, you can only imagine that tremendous demand. I mean, 2 million new people putting on rents. So that's obviously one reason why there's so much pressure on rents. But yeah, here in California, they are trying to figure out how to enable churches to build more affordable housing projects. But churches too are held back because of CEQA, and that's California Environmental Quality Act. That litigation, it doesn't care if somebody's, owned by a church or whatever. The people will stop development. It's just an unfortunate truth.
Here is Cecilia in Oakland, California. Good evening.
Good evening. I just want to add that David was saying that the largest purchasers of home is the venture capitalist. Why does he think that legislation is needed by the states to make it more difficult for these venture capitalists to buy the properties and increase the prices so the average person can't buy them, and maybe make legislation that says a person has the first or a family has the first option to buy the property and live in it for 5 years? Because if you just continue to build housing, the venture capitalists will just still buy up the housing without any legislation.
David?
Well, yeah, and of course, I don't like legislation. I don't like more legislation. But, you're right, something needs to be done because basically Wall Street, and these companies are Wall Street companies, they are buying up again, last year, 1/4 of the new homes that were built. As a matter of fact, they're buying up entire new communities from developers. So a developer will build a whole community. They come in and buy that too. And not only that, they're building now what they call apartment homes. And so instead of apartments, which you are familiar with, that are, high-rise apartments, they're building homes in like a typical suburban community, single-family home, but the landlord will provide all the common area amenities, the landscaping, this, that, and the other. So it's very interesting what's going on. But what they are doing is taking away the American dream for a lot of people, because the American dream is owning your house and building equity over the long term, and then hopefully, giving that house to your children. And so it's a situation that's just grown, and it's something we need to keep our eye on. I mean, so Blackstone's.
Go ahead.
Yeah, they spun off Invitation Homes. They own, I think it's about 80,000 homes is what they own. American Homes for Rent, another big owner, owns 52,000 homes. The way they buy, though, is they actually are more investment-oriented. They're picking off 2,000 square foot homes in Phoenix and in Atlanta. They're targeting homes.
They're third-party parasites who add nothing to the process. Interesting. And with John, who calls in near Fresno, California. Good evening.
Thank you for taking my call.
Mm-hmm.
I've got this issue. I'm just an old 74-foot dump that has no money, no political pull. But I try to get people interested in the idea that in this state of California, where 75% of the legislators are Democrats, if they want to devise a bill, they can get it passed within a week or two. We need to have a bill that we could put on the ballot, which is probably too late now, that would limit these people to only 3 months. We don't need 12 months of legislature in Sacramento. And I don't know how
all right. Do you think that limiting the legislative sessions is an answer to anything here, David?
I do. Actually, in other states, less regulated states, they do limit how long they can meet, because God knows California every year puts out an awful lot of new laws. And again, the whole purpose of my speaking out here about this issue is that this over-regulation of the home building and apartment building industries it's what's causing costs to skyrocket to the point where people can't afford housing anymore, and they're living in tents. It's horrible.
All right, interesting idea there. Thank you. And here's John in Reno, Nevada. Good evening, John.
Good evening, Jim. Recently, I heard them talk about the mega flood that's predicted for California. They haven't had one since 1861, but that would destroy a tremendous amount of housing if it was to approach the scale that it was back in 1861.
Well, what area was flooded back in 1861?
Well, the entire Central Valley was flooded. What happened is the mega flood is caused by a weather pattern, and it's a weather pattern that's supposed to happen about once every 100 years. So we're overdue for it, and they're predicting it to happen again.
Although obviously our water infrastructure is considerably different from that in 1861. But your thoughts, David Rauch?
Well, there's truth to what the gentleman's saying. There's what we call the Pineapple Express, which is basically a river of water that originates in Hawaii and moves eastward and hits California with a tremendous amount of water. We actually had one of those events a year or two ago, and it did cause a lot of landslides along the coast. It obviously wasn't a big event like this gentleman's describing. But yeah, floods happen, but like you said, Jim, the infrastructure right now, I believe, could handle flooding situation a lot better than it could 100 years ago.
Aside from deregulation, what would you like to see done?
Well, I think a lot more research has to go into this thing with Wall Street buying up American homes. You mentioned the word parasite, and that might be a little strong because these are, just businesses playing according to the rules. But
change the rules then.
No, I agree. Wall Street should be investing in companies like they do. They invest in companies that increase productivity and provide a return on the invested dollar. Okay? Why is it that Wall Street is investing so heavily now in homes? Something has changed, and again, the only way to solve this problem is by building a lot more homes and apartments by reducing regulations. And it should start in those highly regulated states, California, New York, Pennsylvania. We need to build more.
All right. And obviously we need to encourage people to build more, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, I don't think there's encouragement needed. Basically we need to just free the American builder from regulations, and they'll build. I mean,
all right, fair enough.
Yeah.
We got to wrap on that note with thanks. Stay on the line, David, and we'll speak off air. David Rauch is founder and CEO of ProTech Building Services.